You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Welcome back to RX Radio. This week, I have Killian Hamilton here with myself, Jordan Junta. We'll be talking training, as always, trying to think a little bit deeper, get you guys to think about it in a way that we believe is the right way to think about it. But before we get into that, we'll just let you know what's coming down the pipe with Prescript is we have the Prescript Level 1 open for registration right now. Class starts end of September. I believe it's September 20th. And you will get to spend somewhere between 16 to a million weeks with Killian Hamilton here, talking training principles, biomechanics, functional anatomy. It is the most complete training course that you can take. So if you're interested in the Prescript Level 1 or if you have questions about it, send us an email, info@pre-script.com. Head over to the website, get on the mailing list, www.pre-script.com. Check out the product while you're there. It's on the product page, and enjoy. Hopefully we'll see you there. But let's get into it. Killian, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
And I'm excited to be here, man. I think, we podcast at a frequency or a rhythm where it's like there's just enough time to get like totally belligerently upset about something.
Yeah.
Collect my thoughts and then come on here and deliver something that's relatively useful to people.
I love it. So what I'm hearing is that we should probably do these a little closer together so we can get the belligerentness, and then
if that's what people want.
Unfortunately, I think that is what people want. Like, there's a lot of value. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of value in this podcast, and there's always a lot of value in the podcast we do together. But it's a different type of value when you're belligerent. It's just entertainment value at that point. It's very entertaining.
Yeah, I think I'm like 10 espresso shots deep at this point, so this will be good. I'm ready.
Ooh, all right. I'm finishing off about a liter of coffee, which is not enough, but I'll let you lead the rage as I wake up.
That's fair.
But so what is it that set you off this time?
I think, and we've talked on and off about this. I'm sure you probably have a folder on your phone of just voice notes between me and Shallow, just nonsensically being like, do you know what I have no respect for? But the biggest thing, my biggest beef with fitness in general right now, which is confusing to me, honestly, is what seems like the massive effort people are putting in to not understand how RPE works. Like, it seems like an active collective effort to just not get it.
Yeah, I understand when there's something new, there's a little bit of resistance. And not that this is something new, but when it's a new idea to someone, right, there's resistance because they actually have to use their brain. They have to think about it. They have to wrap their head around it. They have to get it wrong, see where it applies, see where it doesn't. And it's a process, and it can be frustrating. And it's something that a lot of people get. I think complacency is a good word. People get complacent in what they do, and they think that they know what they do. And I've always kind of thought that claiming that you know something kind of shuts the door for a new understanding, right? Is that if you you and I, we understand training principles, right? We understand them, which means that we know when they apply, when they don't, where they fit. But I don't say that I know everything about strength and conditioning or I know XYZ, because when I say that, then I shut the door for new understanding or new application. So I think people think that they know how to get someone stronger, and they probably know a way to get someone stronger, but they don't really understand how these other things can enhance that or apply. And I think that's where the resistance comes from, is that it's something new, and people don't like new things because they have to learn and they have to adapt what they're doing. And I think that's a big effort for people. But where is it that you see that people are actively resisting this, and why is that rubbing you such the wrong way?
Yeah, so I think I see it from two completely different parties. The first party guilty of not believing in RPE is bodybuilders or people who believe in training to failure. And those people are like people that tell you that they breathe air, but when you explain to them that air is oxygen, they get really upset. And you're like, no, it's always been there. You just know what it is now. And that's the hypertrophy bodybuilders. When you tell them about RPE, they go, no, I train to failure. And you go, that's an RPE, man. It's called RPE 10.
Yeah.
trained to 1 RIR. Cool. That's also RPE. Maybe it's 9. I don't know. But, that's the first party of people. The first party of people is like the bodybuilders who go, no, I do this other thing. And they just don't realize it's always been RPE all along. The other people who frustrate me when it comes to RPE are people who somehow use RPE, but each week strive to add load to the bar. And those people confuse me. The people that go, oh man, I can't do RPE 9 today. That's the one that I like. Oh, I couldn't do RPE 9 today.
Yeah.
What the fuck are you talking about? You can do RPE 9 you can train to RPE 9 every day because it could literally be whatever it is.
Right.
And that's the part that makes me more upset. People go, oh, it's been a really rough. I have clients like this. I have clients and they're going to listen to this and they're going to get butthurt. And I don't care because this is your education on the subject. I'm not going to talk to each one of you individually. This is it. Oh, I think my CNS is fried. I have adrenal fatigue. I just can't do RPE 9 today. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Mm-hmm. Shout out Ross Nesbitt. Great guy. One of my favorite people in the whole world. PSL 1 grad. Amazing coach. The most mature, calm, collected guy. Didn't want to squat really heavy. So instead of 3 sets of 3, I think, did 3 sets of 5 at a lighter weight. And then when you do the math, it was more overall tonnage to do 3 sets of 5 at 365 than 3 by 3 at 405. You went, I wasn't feeling it today, so I did 3 sets of 5 instead. Next time, just don't load the bar as much. Because now you've filled both glasses to the top again. So, my big beef is either people who just pretend it doesn't exist, or the other group of people who associate an RPE with a percentage of of their imaginary max, of their hopeful max. That's on, they're, like Deus Ex Machina max effort lift, and then a percentage of that, and then they don't hit it, and then they get confused how RPE works. So, I think I'm acting like it's really simple to understand RPE because on the surface it is, but there is a level of complexity to like the equation that creates quality RPE training.
Right. I 100% agree with that. And there's actually a really interesting parallel that just came to mind for me about RPE versus percentages in training. And it's actually a nutrition. Yeah, oddly enough, me with the nutrition reference, but it's tracking macros versus intuitive eating is what it is. And I think there's this big thing going around right now about intuitive eating that is not very intuitive, right? Is that you need a lot of experience and knowledge to be able to eat intuitively. Is that you have to learn macro breakdowns, you have to know portion sizes, you have to be able to eyeball, that's probably 6 ounces of chicken, maybe that's like 50 grams of protein. You have to be able to do that sort of thing, which takes a lot of front end learning and understanding about nutrition and your daily requirements. And intuitive eating in that way is very unintuitive because these aren't things that we inherently know. These are things that we pick up after doing this stuff for a long period of time, versus percentages is really easy. It's okay, 0.75 times your maximum is 75% on your iPhone. So it's very much like being spoon-fed versus, all right, you have this knowledge, you have this background information about nutrition or training over your training lifetime. Now use that to be able to inform how much weight we should be using. So that's kind of the parallel that I run, and I think it's really easy for people to prescribe percentages. It's equally as easy to prescribe an RPE. You have to use your brain either way for it to be, for it to match the amount of volume and the frequency that they're training at, and the movements that they're doing, exercise selection, all that shit. It takes, the lights have to be on for you to be able to do that appropriately. But I think it takes a little bit of conversation on the front end for someone to be able to appropriately apply these things. So I guess my question for you is, I'm brand new to training, or I'm brand new to training with you. What's the conversation that you have to introduce me to how I can appropriately use an RPE?
So I think there's a few things that go into this, right? Like you said, like intuition actually has all these steps. So when looking at introducing RPE to someone who's never trained before, I think the first thing that trainers need to reflect on is that nothing at all exists to this client.
Mhm.
So there isn't a better way for them because there is no way yet for them to do it. Right? Trainers go into it and they go, oh, percentages are going to be so much easier for this client to use. Why? They have no idea what any of this even means. And also, if you're using percentages, there's a high likelihood that if you're involving percentages in a program with someone who's never trained before, you're training them in an environment in which technique is going to be the limiter to their quality of effort. And that's why RPE doesn't exist. If you're using percentages, you're with a person who's never trained before, they're probably doing a barbell compound lift where there's so much
Right.
extraneous noise around the effort portion, they're not going to learn how to train hard anyways. So the first thing to think about is if you're involving percentages, the modality is probably incorrect for an effort-based lift. So the first thing you have to do is go, is the environment that the exercise creates something that biases effort over, say, learning, right? So early on with people who have a low skill at squatting, their so to explain quality of effort for everyone, quality of effort is simply the relativity between perceived effort and absolute load. For example, leg press versus high bar squat for a beginner athlete. High bar squat is often something where we compare. We go, this person can leg press 400 pounds, they can only squat 185. Well, there's a poor quality of effort in the high bar squat. The quality of effort is limited by their length of time, their training age, and their skill of the lift is the buffer to their quality of effort. On the leg press, it doesn't take a long time to learn, and there's very little that can go wrong technically. So their quality of effort is really high. So RPE is going to be pretty accurate on the leg press, probably pretty inaccurate on the back squat. So first thing as a trainer, you have to ask with a brand new client is the environment one that nurtures effort? That's probably going to be for most people externally stabilized and externally constrained. So stability and constraint are a bit different, right? External stability creates an internal environment for effort. External constraint controls the path of the load. So a machine chest press is more externally constrained than, say, a seated cable press. They're both externally stabilized, but the difference now is in constraint. So first, does the environment, bias effort? Does the environment nurture effort? The second thing I would say with RPE, and this is going to be something you notice with early clients, is to not go on a completely separate rant, but I think something that's really important is early on in the development of people, as either as children or even as adults learning a task, we're emotion driven because we usually arrive at all the hobbies we do out of emotion. So people come to the gym because there's an emotional attachment to what the gym could possibly provide them. No different than if you want to learn an instrument, you're probably emotionally driven to learn it. You're not logically driven to learn piano. Rarely are you it would be logical for me at 35 to pick up the keyboard. Not a thing that you do. You're logically driven to learn how to code, not how to do a chest press. So because we're emotionally driven at the early stages of our training careers for almost everybody, we need to have an emotionally driven objective. And that objective usually is sensory, right? If it's tied to emotion, it's going to be tied to oftentimes a sensory input. And this is where the argument that I made 3 years ago at a PSL1 course, where I said stimulation doesn't equal sensation, is a really big asshole move on my part. And I would like to redact it from ever being something that's credited towards me. I never said it because sensation is a subjective quality that's going to be more or less important the longer someone trains. Early on in our training career, we're emotion driven, and the sensory input of sensation is incredibly important for us to associate an exercise with a given result. And associating it with a given result increases our quality of effort. If I know that this preacher curl makes my bicep tight and my bicep tight means to me that my bicep grows, I'm going to try really fucking hard to make my bicep feel that way. If I do an exercise that I feel nothing anywhere, it doesn't serve an emotional or sensory value to me. So early on with trainers to explain RPE, before we even get to explaining it, we have to understand, are we creating the environment that's suitable to even teach this skill in, right? It would be like learning to tune a guitar standing on a freeway. You can't hear shit anyways. Why frustrate yourself? Is the environment indicative of the result? So, as a new trainer, external stability, shortened or lengthened movements, probably, because we're going to get a lot of sensory feedback from either option,
Mm-hmm.
and probably a rep scheme that might be a little bit higher, because the longer we do something, the more likelihood we're going to drive the sensory impact of feeling a pump, or shortening or lengthening something. And you're just giving your clients more opportunity to do it right. Yeah, do 15 reps of it, get the last 5 right, just feel it somewhere. So those are all the things I would do first before I even had a conversation of what RPE is.
I like that. Yeah, because you have to qualify the stimulus, right? And we've had this conversation about. I'm sorry. We've had this conversation before about emotion and logic and how they inform each other in everything really, but how that applies to training. And it's almost like the emotional side of it is the subjective side of it, and the logical side is the objective side of it. And it's really hard to separate those things in the gym because it's such an objective thing. Is that I did leg press at 405 last week. I want to do 465 this week. And it's this thing that, logically we could make these incremental improvements time after time, but there's that subjective side of it too. That's also there's we could objectify the subjective side of this if we had some sort of metric on, I my boss came down at me at work and the wife was yelling at me because I didn't take out the trash and I didn't sleep last night because the dog was up all night or whatever it is you can look at these things and you can say, all right, well, in some sort of abstract objective way, you're probably going to perform like shit in the gym today. And it's hard for people to understand that even though they're not feeling good, well, I'm sorry. It's hard for people to understand that when they're not feeling good, they're not going to be able to make those same objective improvements day over day, week over week, because it all compounds. And I think there's this weird space, especially as we're talking about lower training age clients, where their skill level or their output level is so far below their potential because they haven't matched those two things up yet. Like someone like you that's very very proficient in the back squat, you can use that to as an output for lower body strength because you are so skillful at the movement, right? As opposed to someone that maybe hasn't even coordinated a leg press, the skill of a leg press yet, which is a lot lower than a low bar back squat. That person, they have so much room to grow into a leg press that even with objectively shit variables everywhere else in their life, there's going to be a period of time where they can still progress in the gym, even if they're not maximizing everything outside of the gym. And then there becomes this point in training age where they kind of start to fill out their potential, just to say it in a very vague general way, but they're starting to meet the skill or acquire the skill that allows them to use these as an output exercise, and it becomes a more true read objectively of their performance. And then once they get to that point in training, then it's when all these other variables start to play an effect on, okay, we actually need to recover for you to be able to have progress in the gym. And that can kind of muddy the waters, especially for someone that is newer to this, or they haven't necessarily competed as an athlete in the goals, because, oh well, subjectively I've been feeling like shit this whole time, but objectively I've been improving. And then they get to a point where subjectively they feel the same as they have the last 3 months that they've been training with you, but they're not improving anymore. And that's because they've gotten better at training to the point where now they've reached this point where their output is true to what they can output, and they need to clean up all this other stuff, or they need to understand how this other stuff is going to affect it. So I think that's a really hard conversation, not necessarily a really hard conversation to have, but it's hard to get people to understand that you're eventually going to get to a point where the things that you have been doing aren't going to work anymore. And we need to have a more accurate subjective read on how you're feeling day to day so we can continue to have that objective progress in the gym. And that's
Yeah.
that's to me where understanding RPE can be really, really important.
Yeah, and I think what happens is we take these measures of intensity and we kind of rank them in terms of like you get to this point in training and then you get to use this thing, right? It's like,
Right.
and it's all because we've just bastardized what things mean. It's like when you first start training, you just do progressive overload. Why does that mean add 2.5 pounds each week? Why does it mean that? And it doesn't, right? But people go, oh, when I first start training, like you just add a little bit more weight every week or try and do an extra rep. And you're oversimplifying it. But what you're doing when you oversimplify it and when you put a big definition behind something that it literally is not, progressive overload, what happens is you're nurturing in that person the feedback loop of every week I go in and I add 5 pounds and the word progress is associated with that. Well, what happens when this individual who's supposed to be moving from like emotion driven to logic and reason driven is inside of a system that is entirely emotion driven, right? It's the entire, like, progressive overload and its oversimplification of adding weight or a rep each week is building the entitlement into an athlete of I should, therefore I can. And should and can are not, they don't exist in with one another, right? Should is actually subjective. And that's the funny part about progressive overload is progressive overload, or this steady progressive increase in volume or intensity each week, is actually more subjective even than RPE, because saying I should be able to do that this week is a subjective thing. Subjectively, based on how you feel about yourself, you should be able to. RPE is objective. RPE is you can do this. Progressive overload is I should be able to do this. So they actually are opposite, but we tend to think of them differently. So I think, it is a hard pill to swallow RPE, but it's only hard because we swallow it too late. If you build in early on in your client's training career an environment where they can nurture effort, and then you go, okay, well, this is what RPE is. We're going to explain it. RPE 7 is simply all of the repetitions look and move at the same speed and quality. Like, that's the easiest way to understand RPE 7. Everything moves exactly the same. It doesn't slow down. Great. RPE 8 is simply the last 1 to 2 repetitions move slower than the first 3 in a set of 5. Your last 2 repetitions move slower in RPE 8. RPE 9 is every single rep moves slow. RPE 10 is if you added weight or another rep, you'd fail. And it's like, if you think, I always think about this for me with bench press. RPE and bench press make the most sense. A set of 5 bench press at RPE 7, all 5 reps move the same speed. RPE 8 bench press, you do 3, you get to the top, you take a deep breath, you do the last 2. RPE 9 bench press, you unrack it and you're like, 1, you get to the top, you're like, oh, every rep is different. RPE 10 is like, and the spotter has their hands under it the entire time. It's a rep max. And RPE 10 is funny. You don't need to describe it to a client. They'll just get there. I don't need to know what RPE 10 is. I'll know I failed. Somebody will grab the bar. It's RPE 10. So, I think early on with your client, the simplest way to put it is RPE 7, they all move the same speed. RPE 8, second half of the set slows down. And then it's easy when your client tells you, oh, I can't add any more weight. And you go, they all move the same speed, man. We're going to add a little, we're just going to keep adding weight till the reps slow down, And that's where, like you're saying, is for your client, your relationship with a client is this like tug of war of responsibility, of logic and reason. Early on in your client's career, you have to be all of the logic and reason for both of you, because your client is just an emotional animal. They're giving you money. They want something. It doesn't come fast enough. They're freaking out. You're like, Jesus Christ. And you're like logic and reason. You're like, no, hold on. Like, the numbers matter. And as your client grows, you're like, all right, now you're a little bit of logic and reason. Now, when your client's fully mature, they're complete logic and reason. Not only are they using RPE, but maybe you also give them, a selection of exercises to choose from. My most mature clients that I've worked with for 2 or 3 years now, I have a few clients I've worked with for 3 years straight. Their program is auto-regulated to the point where I don't even program their A or B lifts. I give them 3 different movements they can choose from, and all I do is program the RPE. So the load is completely auto-regulated, and even the movement that they feel they could execute with the greatest quality of effort that day is auto-regulated to them. But they're mature athletes or coaches that I've worked with for 3 years, and programming gets to the point where, it's kind of like I'm the AI for them, and I just go, here are your options, pick what, works best on the day. But RPE is only hard because we don't nurture it from day one. We keep it a secret for mature athletes, and then athletes never mature.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think one of the important points I want to pull out of there is you kind of, RPE 10 is failure, as you said. And that's easy to understand on something like a bench press or a back squat or something like that. But I think for things that are maybe more externally constrained or externally stabilized, I think it's hard for people to understand the concept of failure, right? Because they're not technically getting to muscular failure. Right. And one of the things that I think is actually kind of funny because I describe intensity or RPE or like expectations around top sets for lifters the same exact way that you did. And it's I want the bar to slow down, but I don't want your positions to change. And that's as far as I ever want you to take it in Olympic lifting or barbell back squatting, because failure, if we define failure, it's going to be a change in positioning that's going to be ineffective at increasing your ability to do the thing that we're doing, right? So we're not going to adapt in a favorable way if we continue to move in this way. That's failure, and that can happen with a very light load if we don't have a good understanding of how to coordinate the skill that we're trying to do. So a back squat, it's much easier to back squat poorly and start failing your back squats early on than it is to back squat properly. So I think that's something that we need to get our clients to understand. It's something we need to be able to communicate. And a conversation that I'll have or an analogy that I'll make is like a golf swing versus a hockey swing, right? They kind of look the same, right? But there's a completely different intention. And someone that can hit a golf ball well can probably hit a hockey puck relatively well, and vice versa, right? But you're never going to be great at one of these things if you only do the other thing, right? So in training, if we want you to be able to drive that golf ball 300 yards and hit the green, then we have to be having a golf swing every single time that we approach the ball. Same thing with the barbells, that if I want you to snatch appropriately, it can't be this, kettlebell swing, bar hump, dive under thing. It needs to be a snatch. We need to pull the bar off the ground like we're snatching, not like we're deadlifting. We need to be able to extend in a balanced manner, not just kind of smash our hips into the bar. Shout out. I'm not even gonna say it. But anyways, so the skill that we're training needs to replicate the thing that we're trying to get better at. And once we start to have a deviation between those two things, we have now failed. Even if we can, get our hip crease below our knee and still stand up to full extension, shout out CrossFit. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing the thing in a way that's going to make us better at continuing to do the thing. So I think that's a really important conversation too, is that we have to have a conversation around what defines good reps and bad reps. And then once you can separate those things, the second that we move from our good reps to our bad reps, that's failure. That's RPE 10, because we're not doing the thing appropriately anymore. And that doesn't necessarily mean metabolic failure. It doesn't mean neurological failure. It means that we're just not training in a way that's going to support us improving at that movement pattern. So once people understand that and they can identify that on their own, I feel like that's the point when they're ready to auto-regulate in training.
Yeah, and I think this train to failure, it's not a trend. It's obviously been here many times before, and there's merit to proximity to failure, obviously, for muscle stimulation and whatnot. But like you're saying, and what I reiterate to people is there isn't different kinds of failure. There's technical failure, and then there's like renal failure, and
Yeah,
it's like
right.
that's the two options, man. Like there is no in training muscular failure should never be a thing you talk about, because in order to get there, you didn't get there with good technique. And why you sacrifice technique to continue to apply unregulated stress and stimulus to your body is beyond me. You went And it's like, give yourself credit. You went to the effort to pick an exercise, and I'm assuming with a very specific intention that you learned about, and you picked a rep range that was very specific and a tempo that was specific. And then you trained past the specific technique necessary to execute the exercise to get to quote unquote muscular failure, which is itself entirely subjective to all of the trainers out there who want to say, well, my client doesn't know what failure is. It's like, dude, neither do you. Like, you don't know failure either. Failure
Your
is real.
parents do. And
Yeah, your parents do. Like, if your parents are like first generation North American people that you plowed a field, I'm sure they know what muscular failure is because that was life. But if they're not, then you don't know. Like, I don't get it, man. I don't get the necessity, but I do. I say I don't get it, but I totally understand. There's a psychological necessity to extreme bouts of effort because people associate that with getting back something in return. And I got to be honest with you, if hypertrophy is what you're after, and this is the thing too, it's like, if you're looking to get super strong like you on the force velocity curve, or really fast like me on the force velocity curve, there's probably an almost 1-to-1 correlation between what you and I do in training and the result that we're looking for in competition. But I guarantee you, when it comes to body composition, what you're doing in the weight room when it comes to body composition is creating a necessity for adaptation and then applying the direct adaptation of the nutritional or supplemental protocol outside of the gym. You're not doing it in the gym. If I and Shallow do the identical workout, but I eat 2,000 calories less, we get two completely different results.
Yes.
And it had nothing to do with the way we executed the workout. It's sleep, caloric intake, quality of the caloric intake, supplementation and recovery. All of these things are going to change your body composition, not training to failure. As long as you apply enough of a stimulus that your body goes, well, something needs to change if I were to ever do this again, the main difference happens outside of the gym. And that is the reason why it's so hard. Because if all we had to do was put straps on and sit on the hammer strength chest press and just go to failure, we'd all be huge, but we're not.
Yeah.
It's so blind to me. It's looking at it the way you want to see it versus the way that it is.
Yeah, that's so true. And I've been trying to get my biceps bigger than Jorge's biceps since the moment I met him.
It
And
will
I've been
never
doing
happen.
probably 3 times as many curls as him, and I'm still a third of the size of him.
Yeah, dude, I do 100 pull-ups in 10 minutes 3 times a week. I am still 186 pounds.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It really, and it's where, so I talk about this in skill acquisition, and honestly, I think based on the audience that took this skill acquisition, based on the relevant and temporal nature of the industry when I teach skill acquisition, because it heavily involves, I think, psychology to some degrees and philosophy to some degrees. I talk about different things, and one of these things is internal versus external locus of control. And a lot of people probably know what this is and have heard it in other ways. An internal locus of control is you believe everything you accomplish and everything that happens to you is based on something that you had control over. External locus of control is like, you're that guy who thinks, everybody hates him and your life sucks because nothing you ever did was wrong, and it's
Right.
I see the same decisions and ideologies replicated in our space with people that look at effort, failure, intensity, exercise selection, progress, plateau. It's all handing off the responsibility of it to something that people think they can't control.
Yes.
You can recover. If you're eating in a surplus and you're not growing, you're probably not eating a surplus, or you're under recovering. If you can't, over a logical or sensible block of time, increase the load or volume of an exercise at a lesser load, you're probably under recovering, or you're just impatient with when you check in on it, and it's like, I hear periodization talked about a lot. And I think RPE, effort, periodization, you and I talked about periodization before this call. RPE isn't like my favorite way of looking at things. it is the oxygen to people's air argument. And it's like, it just exists at all times, whether we like it or not. And if we want to logically look at progressions that can be made, true strength progressions or neurological progressions, let's say strength, speed, power, probably happen in 3 to 4 to 6 week increments. So if you really want to check the objective progression of something, give yourself an environment to check the progression of something in a controlled manner at that rate. Don't see if you can load the bar every single week. Every 4 to 6 weeks, give yourself a hard top set. See if that goes up. If you're trying to check if you've grown as a human being, dude, it has nothing to do with adding load to the hammer strength machine.
Yes.
That has nothing to do with anything, because I kid you not, I'll go in the gym right now and I'll just keep adding load, dude, and I will still be 186 pounds. I can't help you there. But it's like,
Yeah.
maybe you need to measure it 12, 16, 24, 48, 52 weeks. You can see if you've grown, because you need there to be enough time for there to be a physiological change. How much of a surplus can you incur in that time to create an anabolic environment for muscles to grow? It's at the beginning of this call, it's like, RPE is real simple, and it's subjective. It's like RPE might be an objective. RPE might be the most objective uh, reflection or meditation on your training. All of these other metrics that you see as objective are probably subjective goals in your training. They're not objective measurements of your training.
Right. Right. You make a really interesting point in there that I think needs to be reiterated, is that load is irrelevant in most cases, right? It's unless you have a strength oriented goal, whether that's powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman, I mean, maybe CrossFit, but in most cases, load is going to be irrelevant, especially in hypertrophy training, right? And that's what makes RPE kind of king when it comes to that, is that I, I, I train two populations. One gets exclusively RPE. The other gets majority RPE and then large percentage ranges. We're talking 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
And my rehab population, it's all RPA. RPE. I need you, and this is an important part of the process, is that I don't care what weight you're using. I don't care what the resistance looks like. I need you to be able to interpret your subjective sensations accurately and appropriately for me to believe that you're ready to progress back into actual strength training. And that's something that we can't skip that part of the process. I'm not going to say, oh, you had an ACL reconstruction, I want you to do 60 pounds on the quad extension this week and 70 pounds next week. I'm going to say, no, I want you to do active extension of the knee at an RPE, maybe 7, 8, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. Something where we need to understand that, okay, this is becoming difficult and we need to understand the contributing variables. Is it pain? Okay, we're probably going to shut it down. Or is it the fact that I have been in a straight leg position for the last 3 months and I don't really understand how to use my quad anymore? So it's that population. I think it's very important for them to understand, independent of load, effort, right? Effort and sensations that they can associate with that. And then Olympic lifting, that's it's so independent of load, is that this is probably very similar to sprinting. Is I'm sure RPE works really well there also, because it's not always going to be there. But even on a day where I'm under recovered and it's things aren't lining up the way that I need them to, is I can still get better at snatching by snatching better, not snatching heavier, but snatching better, deepening my understanding or working on refining. Okay, making the association. That's a word that I love with training. I know no, that's part of the skill acquisition model that you teach, but kind of in a different perspective, is that I like to make associations like cause and effect, if then statements, right? If I'm under recovered, if there's a lot of squat volume in the program, my core is jello, this is how my snatch breaks down. So if that's the case, then what I'm going to do is go lighter in the snatch. I'm going to snatch from above the knee, and they're probably going to be power snatches because I have a lot of squat volume. So if high volume squats in program, power snatch from the blocks in program. And then you can make these really like Algorithmic? That's
Yeah.
not how you say that. But you can make this. It's very, very cut dry, the decisions that you're going to make in programming based off of these associations that you're building, and that becomes auto regulation at some point. As if you have 3+ years to foster that relationship with your clients, it's like, all right, you know how your bench press is going to affect your back squats.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you the option of pressing variations depending on the RPE that I prescribe for your back squats. And there's going to be all these things that interplay in training, and these associations that you can make that then you can start to communicate to clients so that they can make those, and it becomes really easy, simple decisions that, okay, we're in a squat phase. That's, I know powerlifters, that's a lot of rotation on the shoulders. So maybe bench press is going to move to something that's more externally constrained, or maybe it's going to be a dumbbell press for the time being. And these are all things that you can start to make these associations and really get auto regulation past the point of just RPE, is that exercise selection also.
Yeah. And, I think it goes back to the point that it's like, if logic and reason are objective things, like to think logically is to be objective about things, right? Like you said, it's cause and effect. If you work with someone who's like very logic and reason oriented, they're usually a good person to go to, because they're not
Right.
emotional and subjective about things. They don't care if they like someone or not. They're like, logically, is this guy the right choice for this task? Yes, he's organized, he's on time, he does blah blah blah. Logically, he'd be the best for this. If you like go to the subjective guy, he's like, I just don't like this guy, I don't want to hang out with him. Well, that's not a good reason to not hire him. Like if he's good at what he
Right.
does. So, with RPE, it takes a logical and reasonable person, and that person probably has a lot of life experience in some ways to get past the emotional things, right? Like what they want or what they like versus what they need. And that's what RPE is, right? It's not what you want or what you like to do, it's what you need to do. And that is, like you say, considering all these external factors to this one movement on this given day for this specific rep range, you're going, what do I need to do to satisfy what's on this Google sheet? And that's where you look at, neurologically driven sports, weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman, sprinting, track and field, all those things. Like when the neurological adaptations trump the physiological adaptations, it goes back to, you and I have referenced it a ton, but it's this force velocity curve. And you're like, I essentially just need you to move at this speed relative to maximum velocity, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
warm up with the empty bar like it weighed 1,000 pounds. If you really think about what that means, it just means move max velocity with the empty bar. Like when you're telling someone to warm up with an empty bar in the snatch like it had 100 kilos on it, you're not telling them to grind through it. You're like, no, man, like
Right.
move it like it's got weight on it. Rip the head off a goddamn lion. And it's like, that's cueing max velocity. And it's cueing max velocity because in a neurologically driven sport or a neurological objective, max velocity is our objective RPE 10, right? Like max velo is what we want. And now we know as we add load, we're slowly moving away from max velocity to the governor of how, like, to the ceiling of where we want to slow down to, right? And that's kind of like how you program. It's like move until it slows down, because you're like, well, now it's not the intended speed. Now it's not the intended speed, or now it's not the intended speed. It's too slow. So setting those intentions with someone, like moving with intention in your warm up. Another thing that messes people up with RPE, and it just came to my mind now, but it's an important thing to note. If you have an RPE based program, your warm ups need to be the intended rep range of the working set. Otherwise,
All the way
you're
up.
working back. How are you going to fit? People are like, I don't know what my RPE is. I'm like, what was your warm up? I did a set of 12. Your top set's 3. How would you know if it's 9 RPE?
That's
What the
so
hell
funny.
are you doing? And like,
Yeah,
I always like, I'll just do multiple sets of the same thing. And like I get to 315 and I'm like, ooh, that was like a bit weird feeling. I do it for the intended working reps and I go, I didn't move the way I wanted it to. I take 3 minutes and then I approach it again and I'm like, oh, okay, fast, then add a little. But it's like, you got to work in the environment that you're measuring for. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark. How would you, if you do a set of 12, you have no idea what a set of 3 at 9 RPE is. That's insane. That's an insane way to work.
Yeah, that's so true. And that reinforces the point that you made earlier about progressive overload is just guessing, right? If I did, 315 for 5x5 last week and, we didn't measure RPE because we're not doing that, I should be able to do, 325 for 5x5 this week, whatever. That's just a guess. But if I work my way up in those fives and I know, oh, I did 315 last week for 5x5, and this feels more like a 7 than an 8. So I'm going to go to 325 and see how it
Yeah.
feels. That's allowing adaptation to happen, is that we're observing the adaptation as opposed to trying to guess and match that adaptation. It's 5x5 RPE 8. That could be your squat prescription for 4 to 6 weeks. It doesn't need to change, but the thing that's going to change is the actual rate of perceived exertion, not necessarily that 8 on the paper. It's how hard is it for you to lift that same weight that you lifted last week. And we're just observing. We're a bystander here. Is that, oh, this isn't as hard as last week, so I am going to go up. Or I feel like fucking shit today, so I'm going to go down. And allowing that to go up and down is allowing you to actually adapt.
Yeah, I think it's something, and the clients I work with probably notice this is, for say the first like 4 to some of them, first 4 to 12 weeks of working with them, their barbell movements, they probably notice like the reps and sets seemingly change every single week. But the total volume actually doesn't. It's always around like 18 to 24 reps. I just change the way 18 to 24 reps is presented while this person improves their quality of effort. And their quality of effort usually improves after you escalate volume to give them lots of practice. And then then you take away volume, you reduce volume to like heavier top sets. And then you see that this person can express a high quality of effort. And then the next, like you said, 4 to 6 weeks of the program, I might just be like, yeah, okay, 5x5 again, 5x5, because now they have the quality of effort where 5 sets of 5 is valuable to them. Whereas early on, if the quality was all over the place, I might undulate those reps to find that sweet spot where it's like some clients will express a good quality of effort in 3 sets of 5. Other people technically can give you 3 reps and then like a bird flies by and you're like, the last 2 were out to lunch. So it's like, maybe that client's a 5x3 client, not a 3x5 client.
Right.
I have other clients I can't trust, and I just give them 2 reps every minute on the minute for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, it's the only way we're going to get anything out of you. So that's what you're going to get, but I think you make such a good point with that, right? It's like this idea behind RPE is so simple because it's at the end of the day, it really is how many more reps could you do, or it's did the bar slow down, or it's could you add load on the next set or not. But the complexity is in understanding as a coach when you're using RPE with a client, that complexity is in understanding how much of it is logic and reason on your behalf, and understanding that your client usually can't apply logic and reason to anything.
Right.
Because they don't have the information to apply that, right? They don't have the experience and they don't have the knowledge that you have, and they don't have any idea where they're going with this exercise. And luckily, yourself as well and myself, like I get to train a lot of people who are also coaches, and a coach's favorite thing to do is, well, why are we doing this exercise? What's the progression of this? And it's like, at times I'm like, dude, it's just push-ups, man. But sometimes I'm like, great, I'm so glad you asked, because I did think of this. And I thought in 12 weeks, we want to go over here. And it's like that information sometimes is so necessary for a client if they know where the exercise is going, because then they can apply the intent to the execution of it, knowing that. Like I'll tell clients, I give lots of people single leg RDL, like with a landmine. I'm a big fan. You like the B stance landmine RDL? I'm a huge fan of it. I love landmine single leg RDL. And people will go, I can't make it any heavier. And I always remind myself to tell people, I'm like, I don't expect you to ever add anything to this exercise.
Yeah.
It's like, it's usually the last exercise in your workout, or it's the first exercise in the workout, simply just moving your hips around, man. Like it's not the environment for effort, right? Like a unstable, unilateral, poorly loaded exercise is not the environment for effort. It's probably the environment for practice. So it's like, no, we're just working on hip extension. We got this other movement, the B stance RDL, that we can load the hell out of if necessary. Single leg RDL, I'm not going to be concerned if it doesn't go up 5 pounds a week for 12 weeks.
Yeah, it's such a good point, is that making sure that the client, we'll say in this case, or the athlete, understands the intention of what you're doing, right? And I love the word practice, is that's something that I use a lot in the programming that I do, is no one's ever just snatching. They're doing snatch practice, right? Until you're on the competition platform, you're practicing. Me, I'm peaking for a meet right now. Every week is practice. I'm practicing my warm-up jumps. I'm practicing lifting on a clock, working backwards from what that attempt's going to be. It's all practice. And that's what it is in the weight room. Even someone with no goal of competing is you're practicing. You're practicing a bicep curl. You're practicing a tricep extension. You're practicing to become more accurate with your quality of effort, to use your terminology, is that we want to get closer to our absolute effort by becoming better at coordinating this movement. And that's what RPE allows you to do is, okay, as long as we're in good position, we're going to send it. Eventually it's going to slow down. Eventually it's going to grind, and then we're going to stop. We don't want to get to the point where our practice is poor practice. We're practice. And that's actually, I'll say this exact thing to people when they're snatching like shit, is like, you're practicing bad reps right now. So you're getting really good at snatching really bad. Do you want to continue to do that? Or do you want to take weight off the bar, slow it down, move better, and practice getting better at the skill movement? And that applies to, insert any movement instead of snatch, because I know a lot of people don't snatch, but that's what it is that bad practice makes you really good at doing things poorly. And that's not the goal. The goal is to become more accurate with that quality of effort.
And I think, I made a post about it today, and I feel like I talked to a lot of people about this, and it goes to what you're saying about, practicing bad repetitions. And I think it's a good question for people to ask themselves. It's like, if you can get to the point with exercise where you understand that, like, you're almost a passenger of time, and it's like time will be the greatest driver of progress, then when you're training and you're looking at rep quality and effort quality, what you have to ask yourself is like, could I execute this movement in this manner at a high frequency, at a high volume for a long amount of time? Because listen,
Yes.
everyone can get crazy strong really fast, doing things however hell they want to. But all things have their own lifespan. And it's like, that might work, but it eventually won't work. And will it stop working short of the time necessary to get good at it? People start weightlifting when they're children.
Yeah.
And then they become good weightlifters in their 20s and 30s. It's like, can you snatch this way for 30 years? Then you probably it's not about longevity and durability and all these other things. It's simply about, like, it's probably going to take this long to do. And is this technique going to last you long enough that you can actually see the return on investment? Like, I did a master's track and field meet. This is kind of the last thing I say, but I think this is a really great example of it. I did a master's track and field meet, and there was a dude there in the 70 plus category doing 400-meter hurdles, which is arguably one of the most technical and also exhausting races you could do.
Yeah,
And he was in his
great.
70s. And I, like, asked him about it. I was like, dude, this is crazy. You do 400-meter hurdles? Like, I'm dying at the 200. I came last place and almost died. And he's like, oh, I just literally have done this since I was a child, like 1946, and he was hurdling, in a dirt field somewhere. And he still does. He just has never stopped. But it's like his warm up. I watched this guy warm up for like 2 hours, and, like, focused, intent, focused. He warmed up a certain way. He 70 years old, shredded out of his goddamn mind. And it's like, this guy has literally trained and recovered and ate in a way that has allowed him into his 70s to run an incredibly hard track and field event.
Yeah.
That guy has done something mature with his training to get there. Could he have been faster? Maybe. Would it have lasted him this long? Probably not. And I think we don't see that in weightlifting, but it's just knowing, you're a passenger at a time. And what we teach in the L1 course is the anatomy and biomechanics, like the function of the body that we teach in L1. It's like understanding human function, the way we walk and breathe. Well, those are pivotal things to be a passenger of time, walking and breathing. And if we can take the goal of putting on muscle or getting stronger and whatever else you want from an emotional standpoint, but we can at least respect walking and breathing while we do it ensures the adherence and the longevity of training long enough to see the fruition of your effort. That's what L1, in my opinion, is about, is
Yeah.
utilizing biomechanics to last long enough to achieve something. If it's powerlifting, or if it's bodybuilding, or if it's being an athlete, that's where biomechanics and anatomy apply, because that's the logical and reasonable way of looking at things. It's like, yeah, I lift for 60 minutes a day. I walk and breathe for the other 23.
Yeah. I love it, man. And that's actually long, long time ago. The only way I've ever had functional movement be described to me that it wasn't just a buzzword was exactly that. Something you could do at a high quality, high effort for a long period of time. And that makes absolute sense. Is if you can't recreate this movement pattern against increasing demands or against difficult demands for the rest of your life, then it's not necessarily a functional movement, right? So that's function in a nutshell. And I love that you kind of brought it full circle that way, because biomechanics dictates that. Is that the way that our body is formed, it dictates the way that we function, which is going to dictate movement. So that's perfect. I think that's a really good way to kind of send it off here.
Sure.
As always, fantastic conversation. I really like the way that you think about these things, the way that you vocalize it. And I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of this and hopefully start to learn and understand what RPE is and how they can use it. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of close out on?
Uh, no, I think the big thing, man, I'd love to see, as many people as possible in L1. I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for, the opportunity to get to co-lecture with Shallow on
Yeah.
these. I think we both have a really unique approach. And, as much as I teach skill acquisition on its own as a course, I bring in as much as I can when it comes to this idea of improving or nurturing a quality of effort. So athlete, RX listener, coach, take L1. It's changed a lot of people's lives. And like you said, I think it
Yeah.
is the most complete approach to training, because it's more than just numbers on a page. It's more than just, a skeleton hanging from a coat rack. So take L1.
I love it. Yeah, and you'll get to connect with Killian for some Q&A if you're in the level 1. Your labs are Tuesday mornings, right?
Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. And with your collective membership, come out 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. Eastern Thursday for the Applied Lab, where we go over what is a principle or concept in fitness that you believe to be important but don't completely understand.
I love it. It's all interactive too, so Q&A, you'll get to have these conversations, not just be a bystander. Come see me Wednesday morning, 7:30 a.m. Pacific time. I'm in the lab there every week. So both of us look forward to seeing you guys there. Prescript level 1. Thanks for hanging out, Killian. Appreciate you, man.
Sure, man.